Hello one and all, and welcome to another Racing Stripe review. Let's talk The Lion King.
I mean, my god, this film is just perfect, and I say that without any hint of irony. This film is simply flawless. The visuals are just beautiful, even by today's standards. The story, even though it's a retelling of Shakespeare's Hamlet, is well written and knows exactly when to be funny and when to be serious. The music is some of the best I've ever heard in a movie.
I mean, I dare anyone to sing the opening lines to I Just Can't Wait to Be King and not smile.
The voice cast is amazing and fits each character perfectly.
Sorry Doug Walker, Matthew Broderick actually puts out a good performance in this film.
Bottom line, there is nothing wrong with this film. I'll even put my hands up and say that as someone in his mid-20s, this film to this day still remains to be my favourite movie of all time. And if you've never watched it...
What the hell have you been doing all this time?
So why am I talking about this film? Well, this week marks the 20th anniversary of this film's release back in 1994.
This film's been out for 20 years. God, I feel old. So, in celebration of this momentous occasion, I've decided to take a shot at looking at one of the more interesting adaptations of this film, that being the video game based off of the movie.
Released almost 6 months after the film's release, Virgin Interactive, previously known for other games such as the Mega Drive version to Disney's Aladdin and Jungle Book, as well as other titles like Earthworm Jim and Cool Spot, developed and published The Lion King in early of December 1994 for pretty much every high-selling video game system at the time. Nintendo Entertainment System, Super Nintendo, the Master System, Mega Drive, PC, Game Gear, Amiga, and even the Game Boy.
Okay, now for the purpose of this review, I'll be looking at the Mega Drive port of this game. Not only was it the version that I played growing up, but it is actually considered to be the superior port of this game. In my opinion, at least.
The game itself starts out in the Pride Lands, your typical Green Hill zone of the game, and to be fair, the game does a good job of teaching the basics in gameplay within the first few seconds. For instance, the first enemy you see can simply be killed by jumping onto it. The next, however, deals damage if you do so, meaning you have to roll over it to turn it over by running towards it and holding down. Then you can safely jump on it. Kind of like Mario if he had Sonic Spin Attack.
And was also a lion.
You also have a roar move which also turns these enemies over, which is helpful if you don't have much room to run around. But don't think you can just scream at every enemy you see, for every roar completely uses up your roar meter. So once you roar at an enemy, you have to wait until it fills back up again. This is also where you're introduced to the way Simba jumps in this game. Depending on how you move prior to hitting jump, you'll either perform a standing jump where you have very little forward momentum, or a running jump, which can help you cover much larger gaps in the game's platforming. Luckily, you're able to adjust your horizontal position in midair, so you're not committed to a particular trajectory every time you jump. Although saying that, the jumping can feel a little too stiff at times, so it can take some getting used to, especially in some of the later levels. I should also mention that this is where the bugs come into play as well. Of course, it wouldn't be The Lion King without our protagonist Simba eating insects.
Even though at this point Simba hasn't met Timon and Pumbaa yet, but whatever.
There are a variety of bugs to be collected. Some will replenish either a small amount of health or completely heal you, while some will either increase your maximum health or your raw meter. Lastly, there are also bugs that will allow you to progress to the bonus levels, which I'll get to in a minute. The level itself is fairly short. I mean, I guess it only exists to show you how the gameplay works, which it does quite well, but it ends with a battle against a random hyena. Now, I don't know if this is meant to be Shanzi, Banzai or Ed, the game doesn't really say, so let's say this is the often forgotten fourth hyena, Derek. And it's about this time I should talk about the difficulty settings, because this does affect fighting against the hyenas.
Yeah, spoiler alert, there's more than one hyena in this game.
There are 3 difficulty settings, aptly named easy, normal and hard, and really there isn't much difference between the 3. The only changes that occur is that on the harder difficulties you have fewer lives, 8 on easy, 2 on normal and 1 on hard, and that hyenas go down in more hits the higher the difficulty, 1 on easy, 2 on normal and 3 on hard. So yeah, that's difficulty discussed. Anyway, defeat the hyena and you move on to the next level. I guess I can take this opportunity to mention the bonus levels in this game. There are 2 types of bonus stage, Bug Toss and Bug Hunt, where you play as either Timon or Pumbaa. In Bug Toss you play as Pumbaa, where your goal is to catch the bugs that Timon throws from above. Sounds easy enough, but if you miss one, it's game over. And aside from the first dozen or so, I'm not sure if there's actually a set pattern as to what bugs Timon will throw. Not only that, but the bugs often fall at different speeds, so you're constantly having to decide which bug to collect, because again, if one bug hits the floor, that's it, you're on to the next level. Fortunately, Pumbaa can perform a belch move that eliminates all bugs on screen in case things get too hectic.
Stay classy, Pumbaa.
The second bonus level is Bug Hunt, where you're simply collecting bugs as Timon. This time your objective is collecting as many bugs as possible whilst avoiding these Black Widow spiders.
Even though Black Widows aren't native to Africa, but whatever.
If you so much as brush against one of these, you'll end the level immediately. And there are a lot of these things around, so you really have to watch your step. This is also a good place to try and stock up on extra lives and continue, since you're awarded them every time you collect a certain amount of bugs. That said, this bonus level is harder than it looks, especially when Timon seems to control a little more slippery compared to Simba. I don't know, playing as Timon feels very different to playing as Simba. Next level is I Just Can't Wait to Be King, and I hate this level so much. And if you played the game as well, regardless of which system, you'll know exactly why.
This is one of the hardest levels in the entire game.
And you know what? It shouldn't be. It's the only level in the game that doesn't have any enemies, but for some reason the developers decided to make that fact completely irrelevant. I mean, the puzzles regarding roaring at monkeys is definitely interesting, albeit simple. Even
though the game has to actively tell you that this is how to complete the level.
And even some of the jumping sections aren't bad, although you have these giraffe heads that, if you stay on them for too long, they'll send you careening down into a lake of one-hit insta-kill death water.
I'm gonna assume that Simba can't swim.
My main complaint with this stage is the ostrich section. It kind of plays out like the Rug Ride level in the Mega Drive version of Aladdin, in that you're instructed to either jump or duck under certain obstacles. Sounds easy enough, right? Then you're given a double jump icon where you have to hit jump twice. But if your timing is off by the slightest amount, you will hit the obstacle and instantly lose a life. Health gauge be damned.
And I have no idea how I managed to get through this level so easily 20 years ago, because playing it now, it's damn near impossible.
So how does this level relate to Aladdin exactly? Well, in Aladdin, the game will actually skip the level if you die too many times. Here, you need to complete this section. Not once, but twice. The second time, you actually have to guess what to do, as in, there is no indication as to whether to duck, jump, or double jump. Fortunately, it's the same sequence every time you play it, so once you get it memorized, you'll know exactly what to do. There's also a bit between these two ostrich sections where you have to do a short platforming section, which would be much easier if the game was clearer in telling me what the edge of a platform was in this level. Something about this game that I've neglected to mention is that when you jump onto the edge of a platform, Simba will actually grab onto the edge and you'll be able to climb up onto it, which is required knowledge in the later stages. But there's also a section where you have to swing on the tails of various animals as part of the platforming. And while this does come into play later on, here it's a lot tricky because the grabbable part keeps moving back and forth, meaning that you're quite likely to miss it and land into the water, which we've already discussed previously.
If there's one thing I will commend the game designers on, is that there's not only a checkpoint that you automatically hit, but there's also an extra life that can be picked up on the way, and since items respawn after you die, I will give credit to the programmers on them recognizing that this level is extremely difficult. Doesn't excuse the fact that this level is difficult, but it's something. It's why I would recommend people play this game on easy, because chances are you'll be using a lot of lives here.
The third stage is the Elephant Graveyard, and it's about time I want to talk about the music. The game, like a lot of the other movie-based Disney games like Aladdin and The Jungle Book in the 90s, goes down the route of having 16-bit renditions to music from the movie, and this level is no exception. Its music being a rendition of Be Prepared. Now I know that when it comes to the debate surrounding which out of the Mega Drive or Super Nintendo is the better, the Mega Drive did not have the better hardware when it came to the sound department. But even though the Super Nintendo port to this game had better sounding instruments, I'm sorry, Sega absolutely trounced Nintendo here when it came to the music. It does seem that in this case Genesis certainly does what Nintendo don't.
But I will say, if there's one thing that the Super Nintendo did do better than the Mega Drive, it's incorporating voice clips from the actual movie into the game.
Everything the light touches is our kingdom. Everything the light touches is our kingdom.
So even though I would rather go for the Mega Drive port over the Super Nintendo, I think when it comes to sound, we can call it a draw between Sega and Nintendo, okay?
So onto the level itself. Difficulty-wise, It's easier than I Just Can't Wait to Be King, which is definitely a good thing, and this also marks the second time you fight against the hyenas, and similar to the Pride Lands, there are 2 instances where you have to fight them in order to progress to the next part of the level. There is also one other hyena running about, but he's completely optional, so unless you want to fight him, you don't have to. But really, the hyenas aren't your main concern. The enemies I always seem to have trouble here are the freaking vultures that really like to swoop down on you. And while they can easily be jumped on, I mean it's your only form of attack, the timing can be pretty tricky to get right since they swoop down at such an angle that 9 times out of 10 you'll get hit by them instead. Kind of like the enemies at the start of Cutlander stage in the first Mega Man.
Yeah, I didn't think you'd see a comparison to Mega Man here, did you?
And they're placed at certain points that they get in the way of the platforming, so much so that you're constantly running the risk of being sent back to the beginning.
Minus the hyenas, thankfully.
There's also this really tricky section about halfway through the level where you constantly have to jump back and forth in order to climb a wall, and if you're too slow, these pillars of what I'm assuming is water will rise up and kill you.
Further strengthening my theory that Simba can't swim.
While this does sound easy enough, the game does offer you to try your luck and jump past your destination to collect a bug, and if you want my advice, don't even bother. You'll never reach it in time. I can be mashing the jump button as fast as possible and I'll only have just enough time to climb to where I'm supposed to be before the rising water kills me.
One minor thing I should mention is that the game does a fairly good job of telling the story of the movie, with exception to 1 or 2 parts, which I'll cover once they arise.
Even the ending to this level is pretty faithful to the source material. As you run off screen, Scar simply watches as you make your escape. Level 4 is the Stampede, and I want to briefly mention the music once more here because again, the game does a fantastic rendition of the music from this iconic scene from the movie. I mean, it does happen to be my favourite piece of music from the actual movie, and this rendition is very close to being just as good, if not better, than the original.
Oh yeah, I went there.
The first thing you'll notice is that the level isn't a side-scrolling platformer like the others, instead taking a, I don't want to say top-down approach, but it's sort of that thing. Anyway, the level involves dodging between the wildebeests that are running towards you, and for first-time players this can be easier said than done, because some of these guys really charge at you whilst others take their time, meaning that knowing when they'll hit you is difficult to determine. But then about a third of the way in, the game starts telling you to watch out for rocks, which I would just recommend jumping over as opposed to running around. And while the game does a good job at saying where these are, the game will occasionally throw in a question mark, which basically means guess. So again, I would just recommend hitting jump when you see these. Oh, and don't forget, you still have to dodge the oncoming wildebeest. The last part of this level is just insane, where the game just starts throwing rocks at you at each second, which for a first time player is pretty stressful, and unless you don't know where each rock is, chances are your adventure might be over at this level. I know it was for me for the longest time. Fortunately, it's all the same pattern with each playthrough, so knowing where to go is fairly easy to learn. And plus the level is pretty short, it's usually over in less than a couple of minutes, so it's certainly an adrenaline rush. Next up is Simba's Exile, and this is another example of the game's really wonky difficulty curve, because while the Stampede may have been kind of difficult, this level practically outright tells you to get lost. The main gimmick here is these falling rocks that will hit you if you're standing still, and it would make sense if there were any reason as to why they're there in the first place. I think it's something to do with the hyenas apparently throwing them at you.
Even though this doesn't happen in the movie.
Speaking of the hyenas, for a level that's supposed to be based around Simba being chased by them, there seems to be a huge lack of them in the entire level. Your only enemies are the ones that were in the Pride Lands, and somehow they pose even more of a threat here because sections of the level are straight up filled with these little buggers. There are also a couple of places where the game expects you to parrot Indiana Jones by having large boulders suddenly come at you with no provocation, so be expected to lose at least 1 life to those. That said, you're most likely to lose a few lives near the end where you have to perform a series of platforming, including jumping from swing to swing. Kind of like in I Just Can't Wait to Be King, except here your targets aren't moving, but the hitboxes are pretty small, so your aim has to be just right or else you fall to your death. The level also likes to want you to do a few leaps of faith at this bit, since the platform you want to land on is just outside your field of view. Anyway, once you manage to work your way through all that, you get a nice animation of Simba running through the background and another clip from the movie plays.
If you ever come back, we'll kill ya!
Yeah, I know, it's not the best sound quality compared to the Super Nintendo version, but give it an A for effort at least. And then you're taken to level 6, Hakuna Matata. This level is a little different when it comes to the stage layout. Something you'll discover is that for the most part, the levels are really linear, acting like simple obstacle courses, although you probably won't notice it given how compact some of them are. Anyway, this one is just as linear, except there are a number of branching paths in the form of these water slides at the beginning of the level. The level also features some of the more annoying enemies in the game, the frogs and jumping spiders. The frogs may constantly spit towards you, but at least they stay still. The spiders, however, have a habit of constantly jumping into your path.
Remember when I said the swing was tricky in the last level? Well, it's no different here.
Only this time it's much more lenient if you fail. Instead of killing you, it just sends you back to that section. After that, you're treated to the main gimmick of this level, the waterfall. Now to be fair, it's not that difficult, but first time players are gonna have trouble with it. You have to keep jumping on these falling logs, slowly making your way up, and while there is a set pattern as to how often they fall, it's made even tougher because the logs fall at different speeds. And unless you have a method down, you'll find yourself slowly going down the waterfall towards the one-hit kill death water instead of going up it. The graphics for the waterfall don't exactly help either. My recommendation is to stick to the centre and just keep jumping up, sticking to the slower logs. After a small bout of platforming, you'll come across to the boss to this level, a giant gorilla that throws what appear to be coconuts at you.
Yeah, I'll take things that never happened in the movie for 500.
Safe to say, this boss is much easier than most would think. The coconuts he throws at you can simply be jumped over or jumped on. After a short while, he'll get angry that you have such pro dodging skills that he'll try to pull off a gutsman and smash the floor, which would seem intimidating except for the fact that he's completely open to attack at this point.
Wow, 2 Mega Man references in one video? That's something I thought I'd never do.
Anyway, do this enough times and you'll get so angry that it'll be the cause of his own demise, he falls into the river below, and then the level just ends there and then. Next up is Simbas Destiny, and at this point you're no longer as Simba as a cub, but as an adult instead. At first glance you think that this would be great.
Except the fact that adult Simba plays nothing like cub Simba.
First off, you can't jump on enemies to kill them. What the hell? The one form of attack that you've gotten used to over the last 6 levels, and they take it away from you. What you have instead is a slash move, which again sounds great on paper, but this means you have to get right up close to your enemies, leaving you as open to attack as they are.
Yeah, adult Simba roaring is actually less effective than cub Simba roaring. I'm sorry, what? I mean, I understand that this game is meant to follow the plot of the movie, and aside from a few things here and there, the game has done a good job of it so far, but I simply cannot see the logic in changing so much for the sake of story progression.
I know there aren't any hyenas in this stage in particular, so what you're seeing is footage from the later levels, but take a look at how many hits it takes me to take down one hyena. 5 hits! Beforehand it took me 3 or less depending on the difficulty. I just don't know what was going through the game designer's heads when they were coming up with this. By the way, your roar, which has served very little purpose in this game, is now completely useless because it now does absolutely nothing to the world around you. In terms of difficulty, this level is par for the course, but the difference in gameplay doesn't do anything to help. There are 2 enemies that you'll come across, the first of which are the monkeys. These little buggers are annoying because they constantly throw rocks at you, and it doesn't matter if they're on screen or not, they will attack no matter what, even if there happens to be a solid wall between you and it. Luckily they can be taken out in one hit. The second are the leopards. Or is it jaguar? Well, anyway, they're big cats with scales. And while they are easy to take care of, they're annoying not because they go down in several hits, it's because there are so many of them that you have to fight. And by have to, I mean you cannot continue unless you kill a certain number of them. So your best bet is to stay in one spot and just mash the attack button. There are also a couple puzzle platforming segments involving swiping at vines after holding up boulders and releasing them, providing an extra platform to traverse the terrain. Overall, the level itself is pretty simple, but it doesn't explain why the gameplay was changed so drastically. The next level is Be Prepared, which, while the game does a great job of retelling the story in the movie, fans will recognise this as the biggest deviation, more so than the gorilla in Hakuna Matata, because this entire level never happens in the movie. I guess it's meant to be based off of the movie's musical number this level takes its name from, but really this feels more like one of those levels that were only to put in to make the game longer, which happened in other Disney games made by Virgin Interactive, but here it feels the most out of place. The level itself isn't bad, but it's here that the difficulty can really be frustrating for the player. Granted, this is during the second half of the game, so the game naturally has to get harder as it goes on, but this level! Remember when I said I just can't wait to be king was the hardest level in the game? Well, this stage comes in as a very close second, because this was always where I got a game over as a child. Because this game gets insanely hard, insanely fast. Okay, I can stomach the fact that this level takes place in a volcano of some sort, but what annoys me the most is that the lava not only likes to drip from the ceiling, but it'll also make a small splash as it hits the floor, meaning that you will get hit by it at least once. On top of that, there are these small lava flows that shoot up which aren't synchronized with the lava drips, and since these do just as much damage as everything else in this game, you had better picked up all of the health upgrades thus far, because you will run out of health before the halfway point if you don't. And there are only like 6 or 7 health bugs in this level, but considering how difficult it is to reach them, you'd think there'd be even less. The leopards make a return in this level, and so do the hyenas, but they pose as equal as a threat, but just like last time, they can be taken out with a melee attack, which again begs the question, why can't I just jump on them? Oddly enough, the most annoying enemies in the level aren't the leopards or the hyenas, but the bats. I hate these things so much, more than the monkeys in the previous level, because these guys just pop out of nowhere to attack you with no pattern, meaning that you will get hit unless you act fast.
These bats are just as annoying as the ones in the Mega Drive version of Aladdin, which I suppose makes a small amount of sense given it's the same developer, but that's beside the point, and may I remind you, they do the exact same amount of damage as everything else.
The game also has a section where you stand on a platform that's floating across a giant pool of lava, and just like in I Just Can't Wait to Be King and Hakuna Matata, if you fall into it, you die instantly, only here it makes a lot more sense because here it's lava and not water. Anyway, you've got a bit of timed platforming to go through, some more bats and leopards to take care of, you've got another Indiana Jones style bit, only much harder, and when you get to the end you have this really dumb waiting game that involves jumping back and forth between these mini volcanoes to get plugged up with falling rocks over time. The whole process seems to take forever and really slows down the game in my opinion. Granted, the game isn't as fast paced as say Sonic, but this is definitely one of the slower sections in the game.
I just want to point out that for a level called Be Prepared, there seems to be a distinct lack of it with regards to the music. Just wanted to point that out.
Anyway, after all that, we got Simba's return. And while I have been talking about the game's difficulty over the course of this review, this level is difficult for a different reason. You see, this level is laid out like a maze. You walk out of each room through a doorway, and each room is filled with hyenas.
Well, okay, that's a bit of an exaggeration. There's only about 2 to 5 hyenas in each room.
And the goal is to kill all the hyenas in that room, which you're then able to leave that room to the next, where you're greeted with more hyenas, rinse and repeat. But like I said, this level is like a maze, only instead that if you go into the wrong room, either you go into another room, or you just end up back at the beginning, meaning it's very easy to get lost in this level.
And as I discussed in the last levels, you can't jump on the hyenas to damage them, meaning you constantly have to use your melee attack.
It doesn't help the hyenas are placed in the worst possible places either, and there are only like 2 health pickups in the entire level. Also, the level doesn't do a good job of telling you when it's over. You'll reach a room with half a dozen hyenas in it, and once they're down, that's it. The level just ends. Fade to black. Next level. Speaking of which, the next and final level in this game is Pride Rock, where you finally face off against Scar. Well, not entirely, you actually have to fight him a total of 3 times in this stage. And okay, I get that this is the final level and Scar is the final boss, so I understand that he has to be at least a bit challenging.
But my god, is he such a pain in the ass to fight.
Okay, so get this. You have to constantly smack him with your slash attack to weaken him. I get that, but then he turns into a complete prick and blocks all of your attacks. And if you get too close to him at all, he jumps at you and starts smacking you left and right, draining your health, and I swear to god there is no way of getting out of that. I've tried all types of button mashing and nothing seems to work. By the way, weakening him by smacking him in the face does not equate to damaging him. The way to actually damage him is wait until he's weak enough for him to actually be open to attack.
Steady state lasting for all of half a second, mind you.
And then when you finally get a window of opportunity, you have to hit him by using your throw move.
Oh, did I fail to mention that when talking about adult Simba's gameplay back in Simbas Destiny? Yeah, turns out the game doesn't do a good job of telling you that either.
And I don't understand why they would fail to mention such a core part of the gameplay, especially when it's actually required to beat the game.
I mean, it doesn't help that the move is extremely difficult to pull off, and even then, I don't really fully understand how to. Something about hitting raw while hitting attack at the same time, or rolling your thumb off 2 buttons. Fortunately, if you have a 6-button controller, which Sega thankfully brought out the year before, you can just use one of the upper buttons instead of trying to figure out this stupid combo.
Once you defeat Scar for the first time, he'll run away and it's up to you to reach him via the platforming, which for the most part is pretty straightforward, except for the fact that the level likes to throw lightning and fire at specific platforms. And by specific, I mean the ones you have to go onto to get through the level. So at least be thankful the game has at least given you health pickups, and at least they are more plentiful here than they were in Simba's Return. Apart from that, the platforming is half of the course right about now, and nothing to write home about, but it wouldn't be fair if I didn't at least mention the fire and the lightning. Anyway, you go through all this a second time, then you finally face off against Scar for the final time, and really there isn't any difference between any of the fights. Scar is as annoying as always, and he doesn't change his attacks, kind of like Proto Man in Mega Man 3.
There I go, referencing Mega Man again.
Plus, the game doesn't do a good job of telling you how to actually kill Scar.
I mean, if you've seen the movie, it's pretty obvious, but here, not so much.
When you hit Scar enough times, he'll permanently go into his weak state, where he's constantly panting. And what you have to do now is keep throwing him until you get him off the edge of the cliff, like Simba does in the movie. And then once you throw Scar off, the game ends, with the appropriate music being a final 16-bit rendition of the main theme.
So that's The Lion King for the Mega Drive. And okay, I know I was being pretty nitpicky near the end, but this game is just fantastic.
The visuals are just beautiful and never feel out of place. The music is some of the best I've ever heard from the Mega Drive.
Not to mention, for a movie licensed game, this does a good job of telling the story than most games today would do. But the game isn't quite perfect. I do feel that my complaints with adult Simba's gameplay are legitimate. And the fact that this is one of the hardest games on the system, to the point where it's borderline unfair at times, I do think it's a serious issue. I mean, 20 years on, I still have trouble getting through this game. Taking all that into account, would I recommend it? Oh, without a second thought, yes. If you haven't played it yet, you damn well should. And while you're at it, go watch the movie. I mean, it's been out for 20 years, so you won't regret it. So, this has been a Racing Stripe review, and I will see you next. Hello?
What could possibly go wrong?
Motherfuck. I'm gonna be a mighty king, so enemies beware. Shut up, it's an awesome song.